We've seen a bit of a wild ride over the last year, let's say, some heartbreaks, some highs, some lows. 2019, though, shaping up to be quite a stellar year, at least in the crypto markets. Can you give us a little bit of insight into the recent price rallies across the crypto markets, Bitcoin, altcoins as well? What do you think are the main driving factors here?
Well, I think, so first, right, people were complaining that Bitcoin is too volatile, right? It goes from 6,000 to 12,000 to 19,000, then crashes down to 3,000, right? And then Bitcoin finally got stable, right? It was at 3,000 for quite a long time, right? And everybody was like, yeah, we wanted stability, but not there, like more here, right? And then, if you know what to look for and there's some addresses that you kind of watch, and when you're doing your block explorer, we started seeing movements in December, repeated in March, right, of some major investments, right? And then I think, what we have now is just kind of an inevitable kind of re-rally, right? And what we've seen is that although the peaks are exaggerated in the Bitcoin chains, the recalls falling back down have always been less, right? So percentage,ly even the 19,000 to 3,000 drop, right, was less of a drop than earlier in the last peak and the last crash, right? So I think it's an exaggerated and extremely sentimental. However, I think if you were to sort of draw a baseline through it, you could see actually a slow, continual progress of Bitcoin outperforming most of the other asset classes in globally, pretty much, and it's going to continue to do that, right? I think what we've seen now, obviously we've got Facebook and Libra, right? It's on everybody's lips, and that's a weird thing. So I don't care really, your personal perspective of Facebook, but he put cryptocurrencies on everybody's lips, right? That's a billion people talking about something that they before maybe only kind of saw tangentially. And that's a huge step forward for adoption, right? So I think that's definitely influencing it. But I think we're seeing institutional money now going in there. 500 billion new market capitalization in Bitcoin. You can't do that without institutional money, right?
That makes sense. So institutions moving into the game, some big players as well, like you mentioned, Facebook, and then just some standard maturity of the asset class in general, I guess we'd be looking at there. What do you think, in terms of looking forward, 2019, the end of 2019, what are some of the developments in the space, crypto or blockchain, more on a more abstract sense, that you're really looking forward to? What do you think 2019 will go down in history as?
I think it'll go down in history as this is when people started stopping to think of the hype and the nonsense and starting to get around the real applications. So I think you see things like Libra's movement with in Geneva, and you think, wow, what a surprise, right? But in reality, these guys have had 40 engineers working on blockchain in Palo Alto for 2 years, right? And none of these things are surprises, right? The people that have been sort of strongly looking at blockchain and working with it all through the hype cycle, not really caring what the Bitcoin price was. Those guys are now 3 years in, right? And they are starting to come into the market with adoption protocols that are getting fruition, and that's really encouraging, right? So they might have shifted a little bit in their journey, but now we're really seeing blockchains come to life and adoption happening, and that's a great thing.
Absolutely. And now another development or a revival or a new focus, this new IEO opportunity here. Can you give us a little bit of an outline about what that is and why it's significant? Maybe contrast to some of the more traditional, if you can call them traditional, ICOs and ITOs, etc.
So, and I speak, purely from my own perspective here, right? I am not a big fan of the IEO. I don't believe in the $100 million decentralized fundraise. I believe in that those were largely overstated by pump and dumps. I think the IEO is a relatively cheap veneer of a similar type of market behavior, and I think that's distracting from real investment opportunities in blockchain fundamentals, in AI, machine learning, supply chain management, or other places, or in the financial sector, and that's what I don't like. People don't realize that to start a licensed exchange, you're looking at $20,000 investment in hardware and software, and a legal entity somewhere. Right now, because I invested $20,000, is that enough of a security that your token is not a pump and dump? Probably not, right? We're not talking about the New York Stock Exchange issuing IEOs, right? We're talking about Bob and Fred's exchange, services, right? And just because it's an exchange doesn't mean that it won't disappear overnight and your money won't be gone. So, and I think that's unfortunate, because again, most of this currency is really thriving in Asia. And I think if you know the culture in China, then you also know that gambling and the gamification is a national pastime, right? And therefore, they get distracted by quick money opportunities, right, in lieu of more solid fundamental investments in blockchain technology. So I'm not a fan of IEOs.
Not a fan. Okay, fair enough. Well, we already talked now about Facebook moving in on the space, but cryptocurrency is also on the lips of the international scene, the international overlords, if you will. We've seen some new guidelines put forward by the FATF just this month, and the G20 as well getting in on the action. Main takeaways from sort of these new guidelines? Do you have any comment there?
I think anytime that a supra-regulatory body comes up with guidelines, right, and Switzerland ultimately always adopts those guidelines, right, I think that these it's good, right. We had a gentleman on the stage here from the London School of Economics making a public statement as he thinks cryptocurrencies are bad and he thinks they should all be banned, right. And I think that's great, right. And I got tapped on the shoulder and say, who invited this guy, right. But I think that that's exactly the type of dialogue we need to have, right. Why do you think they're bad? What about them is incorrect? What is the challenge that you have? Oh, okay, well, if we have another global financial crisis, then the cryptocurrencies will actually increase the intensity of that global financial crisis because they'll be in a way that regulatory banks can't monitor at the moment. Okay, great. Now let's focus on that challenge, right? And I think that through that dialogue, people come together because, like, you cannot build walls to hold us back, right? This is like holding back the sea. It will come and it will change the way things work. Now, it'll do so either in a way that's regulated and controlled, or it will do so anyway. And I think that the game now is to do so in a way that is the most constructive and least destructive as possible.
That makes a lot of sense. And we've seen definitely some examples of some naysayers jumping ship to the other side, especially, Jamie Dimon, the JP Morgan thing like that. Any comment there on some of these banks moving in on the space?
It's funny, right? Because I was the CEO of Swisscom Blockchain. I think we had been working with every single major bank, not just on a Swiss level, but on a European level. Although many of them won't offer Bitcoin to their customers, almost every single one of them were trying to figure out what does digital asset custody mean. Most of them had integrated that into their standard asset management portfolio because the asset managers just see it as an instrument with less friction, easier to construct as an ETF. And so, I think that, we're not doing anything in cryptocurrencies. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, right? And that's the kind of movement that we see, right? We've got Quorum coming out, so it's, I think it's, we're not quite ready yet with our cryptocurrency, so we're not doing anything. But, once we launch it, it'll be great, right? I think that inevitably anybody with the insight and outlook, as JP Morgan does, will see that this is the coming tide, right?
So we talked briefly about some of the new regulations on the AML, KYC side of things. If we could pivot a little bit to cybersecurity, and you mentioned also custody as well, key custody, these are big topics now in the space. What do you think the industry has learned over the last years in these realms?
Well, what you see is that the exchanges tend to still get hacked, right? What you see is that the movements away from a proof of work, like Constantinople for Ethereum, they're also not without their risks. Anytime you change a massive consensus protocol, right? There's movement. Those movements create vectors. Anytime that you become interesting, right, there's a lot of bodies out there that would like to figure out if there's a game to be played with you, right? And so I think that we have as many people with black hats trying to penetrate, what should be solid infrastructure. What the good news is we have also a lot of people with white hats, right, that are trying to, Chain Security was a Swiss company that ultimately, found the Constantinople vector. On the phone with Vitalik the same day, and they put off the release, right? And I think that we have those kind of big brain guys. I was at their office and it was like 11 o'clock, nobody's around, and I was like, hello, I thought I was in the wrong movie, And he goes, oh no, these guys stay till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, right? So, they work in different hours, but it's that kind of, spy versus spy kind of economy that you have going on there. So I think that's great because ultimately it makes everything stronger.
Absolutely. Now, of course, you've been at the helm, president of the CVA for some time now. I'm wondering if you could give us a little breakdown about the goals, aims, and wishes of the association.
So the CVA is, I think, the one of the most powerful blockchain ecosystems in the world, right? And I wish it was a recipe that we could just repeat, but actually it was a phenomenon, right? Vitalik, bringing Vitalik and Ethereum to Zug, and then having that grow from that basis has created a central point, right? That on a very fertile ground of very proactive and very foresight-thinking regulators, right? You don't build a building on sand, right? And one of the reasons Libra is in Switzerland is because you can count on the laws not being pulled out from under your feet here. So I think that has brought in an extreme open dialogue, right? And for some reason, this brand has found the other pools of like-minded, kindred spirits around the world, in Malta, in Berlin, in UK, in Amsterdam, in Singapore, in Shanghai, in Korea, and Palo Alto, and connected them. And that's what you end up here, is that you have a lot of international delegates coming together, having open discussions about moving the process forward, right?
So a safe legal system you can rely on and open dialogue. What else about Switzerland makes it so attractive, you think, to the blockchain ecosystem?
Well, obviously the weather is fantastic. Yeah. The mountains. I think what's interesting here is that we have a very even our government is decentralized, right? We have 26 cantons. It takes sometimes a long time to change the laws, but I think that kind of basic mentality of thinking, I think it's also, we have a relatively high standard of living. I think that makes things easier. But we're also kind of, if you kind of had to throw a pin at the wall right now, you see a shift from east or west to east as far as, financial strength. 300 million more financially affluent Chinese than there was a decade ago, right? And you see that happening in India and Pakistan, right? And so, it would be more like Istanbul would be, the country that really spans the two most prominent continents, right, at the moment. And I think that Switzerland is actually an extremely good base of operations to work in all those spaces, right? And most of the time, we don't really have any political issues with any of the other candidates. So it's also a kind of a neutral base of operations.
Yeah, so the neutrality helps. And also you touched on as well, there's something of a almost philosophical congruency between the blockchain movement and the Swiss way of operating politically and direct democracy and that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting to see. Great. Well, hey, really enjoyed the conference so far. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Looking forward to speaking again.
Yeah,
Cheers.